Hello, Rupert. Good morning. I would like a little help with the context of something that happened recently. And so I'll start by saying that I've fallen in love with emptiness for some time. And then 2 days ago in the tantric meditation, something happened in a way that it felt like some rubbery dumplings or something got pushed through a grommet. It just got kind of into, and with that occurring, the feel of my awareness, it just became imminently clear how it was being produced. It was being rendered from, it was twofold. One was it felt like it was from sort of a deity goddess type of thing, which is my practice, but it was also imminently clear that it was myself that was rendering the world in front of me, and there was great warmth and affection that has come with that, and it stayed. So I'm again trying to understand this, because it feels like I'm seeing the world of my own making, but it's also being made by something else. And so one of the features is that everything has been brought close. Like the mountains are not very far. They're all sort of in the near field. And so, it could be considered to be a little bit slipping into solipsism, but it doesn't have that feeling to it at all. It feels warm and engaged, and I think there are more steps to all of this. But again, just trying to love a little understanding of what's all happening.
Okay. Let me respond to what you said about solipsism, which is the belief that only our own individual mind exists. Now, an extreme version of solipsism is that only one individual mind exists. A broader version of it is that there are only finite minds, and that what we know, so some approaches of idealism, an extreme approach is only one mind exists. That's my mind. Obviously, it's our own mind. So none of you have your own minds. None of you have your own internal experience. You're just images in my mind. That's a very extreme version. Then other extremes, and we hear this in some traditional versions of Vedanta, that there's just a sum total of all minds, and that the world, as we know it, is simply a projection of our mind. That there is nothing to the world other than the content of our own finite minds. And this is, I would suggest, a misunderstanding. That reality extends way beyond the limits of each of our finite minds. In fact, each of our finite minds, I would suggest, as we've discussed this week, is a localization of reality within reality, through which reality is perceived as a world. So the reality of the world, the reality of the universe, which we could call consciousness or God's being, precedes the finite mind. Indeed, the finite mind is an emanation of it, or a localization of it. However, when reality is viewed through a finite mind, the finite mind imposes its own limitations on what is perceived. Just as one who wears orange-tinted glasses sees orange snow. The snow, the existence of the snow, precedes the orange glasses, but the snow appears in a way that is consistent with the limitations of the glasses through which it is seen. So the orange snow is a combination of the pre-existing white snow and the filter through which it is seen. And the conjunction of these two creates orange snow. So what I would suggest is that the reality of the universe pre-exists all of our finite minds. Our finite minds are emanations or localizations of that reality. So the reality of the universe is prior to and independent of any of our minds. But reality is perceived by each of our minds in a way that is consistent with its limitations. Now, our minds, these are the orange-tinted glasses, are configured to perceive to experience in 4 dimensions. As a result of this, when we look at reality, surprise, surprise, it appears in 4 dimensions, time and space. The only reason reality appears as 4 dimensions, I'm not saying that's what reality is, I'm saying it's the way it appears. It appears in 4 dimensions, that is, it appears to be a universe in time and space, because of the limitations of the mind through which we perceive it. So the reality of the world is independent of our minds, but the appearance of the world, the appearance of that reality as the world, depends on the configuration of our minds. So that's what we perceive as the universe is a conjunction of infinite, formless reality meeting the limitations of a finite mind. And the conjunction of these two create what we perceive as the world. In other words, the finite mind doesn't create the world. The ultimate reality of the world is uncreated, and it precedes its perception. But our sense faculties create its appearance.
Can I add a piece that's also, well, and that is, you used the term lucid waking yesterday, and because it also feels like it's a malleable perception, and so there's a way of, I can see from a place of judgment, and then it can also just dissolve, and it's almost like I can see multiple versions are available to.
Yes, as your own mind changes, so our perception of reality changes accordingly. If you have a couple of glasses of wine, your mind is slightly altered. The world you perceive is slightly altered. Its reality doesn't change, but what you perceive changes because the filter through which you perceive it changes. If our minds were configured in 3 dimensions, we would see a completely different universe. Imagine that our mind had an extra dimension. It's not possible to imagine that. But try to imagine that our mind had another faculty of knowing that wasn't just thinking and perceiving. Thinking bestows a single dimension on reality, perceiving bestows 3 dimensions on reality. In other words, we think about time, we perceive space. So it's the conjunction of thinking and perceiving, which is the nature of the nature of a human mind, which renders the world in 4 dimensions. But imagine that we didn't just think and perceive. Imagine that we also X, and that X added a 5th dimension. What kind of a world would we perceive? We'd perceive a world that wasn't just a world in time and space. It would have another dimension. What would that dimension look like? We have no idea. We cannot imagine it. Imagine an example that some of you will be familiar with. Imagine a lake, and imagine a creature that lives on the surface of the lake. And that creature's mind is configured in 3 dimensions, time and 2 dimensions, of space. It can see forwards, backwards and sideways, but it knows nothing of up and down. Try to imagine what its universe would look like when this creature gets to the edge of a lake and it sees the branches of a weeping willow dipping into the lake. What does it see? Just lines in its world. And because the branches are moving up and down in the wind, the lines get smaller and they get longer. And then one day one of the branches snaps off and the line disappears. And it thinks that it has ceased to exist. So it is seeing a cross-section of reality that is consistent with its own limitations. Likewise, we are now seeing a cross-section of reality that is consistent with the configuration of our own mind. And we simply... It's not that there are other dimensions out there. Physicists talk of 11 dimensions. No, there are no dimensions in reality. Reality is dimensionless. There aren't multiple universes out there. These ideas are all ideas that physicists who have an intuition of what we are speaking of here, and yet they interpret that intuition in line with their preconceived ideas of time and space. So they add their new ideas to their old ideas. And they talk about many universes or many dimensions in reality. No, there are not many universes. Ultimately, there is no universe. There are no there are not 11 dimensions out there. There aren't even 4 dimensions out there. Reality is dimensionless. It is not extended in any dimension. It is not in time and space. Jane's world doesn't take up any time or space in Mary's mind. It is the configuration of our minds that render dimensionless consciousness in 4 dimensions. If our mind were configured differently, we would render the reality in 5 dimensions or 11 dimensions, or we must be open to the possibility that there may be innumerable possible dimensions, not because those dimensions exist out there in reality, just because reality can configure itself in the form of a mind that consists of any number of dimensions. Why? Because it is infinite.